Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about The Second Shepherd's Play by the Wakefield Master. And I'm reading this in the Norton Anthology of Drama. So that's the slightly modernized version of the text that I'm going to be quoting from. This is a medieval Corpus Christi play or cycle play. And this was a really fascinating genre because in medieval Europe, particularly in England, they developed this tradition of the cycle plays, in which basically you had a series of short plays that depicted all of biblical history, theoretically. Not really all of it. I mean, there's a massive amount of it, but they depicted important stories, or sometimes stories that weren't that important biblically, but that would be of interest to a medieval audience. So The Second Shepherd's Play is a really good example of this because it's such a weird play for modern audiences. But when you start thinking about it in terms of what is it doing for an audience of medieval people in Wakefield, which is a town in West Yorkshire, I think, somewhere in Yorkshire at any rate. So this was rural northern England in the 16th century, 1500s, late 1400s, somewhere in there. No one's really sure when the Wakefield cycle comes together exactly. But The Second Shepherd's Play is so bizarre for modern audiences, in part because so much of it has nothing to do whatsoever with the biblical story that theoretically is being told, which is the summoning of the three shepherds to witness the nativity of Jesus. So we have the three shepherds, Call, Gib, and Daw, and the play begins with them just sort of complaining. So we have this long bit by Call, who's the first character we meet, and I'm going to read this to you because it's lengthy, but it's interesting in that it raises this sort of litany of complaints about the weather. And this is very much the weather of rural northern England, that it's cold, that it's rainy, that the moors are muddy, etc., etc. This is not the weather of 1st century BCE Palestine. This is very much the weather that the rural, the audience of Wakefield peasants and townsfolk would know. But then he moves to this second complaint, which is about social inequality and the ways in which the poor suffer under the exploitation of the rich. Sorry. So this is very much an opening speech concerned with the pain of this world, particularly the pain of this world pre-redemption by Christ. But then, interestingly enough, toward the end of the speech, he does make a turn, and I'll talk about that after I read you this again, fairly lengthy speech that I think is so interesting. So Call enters. Lord, how this weather is cold, and I am ill-wrapped. I am numb with cold, so long have I napped. My legs they fold, my fingers are chapped. It is not as I would, for I am all lapped in sorrow. In storms and tempests, now in the east, now in the west, woe is him that never has rest, midday nor morrow. But we hapless husbands who walk on the moor, in faith we are near hands out of the door. No wonder as it stands if we be poor, for the earth of our lands lies fallow as the floor. As ye ken, we are so hammed, for-taxed and rammed, we are made hand-tamed by these gentle-ray men. Thus they rob us of our rest, our lady them harry. These lords men are pests, who cause the plough tarry. What men say is for the best, we find it contrary. Thus our farmers are pressed in point to miscarry in life. Thus hold they us under, thus they bring us in blunder. It were a great wonder if ever we should thrive, or if ever should we thrive. For may he get a paint sleeve or brooch nowadays, woe is him that him grieves or once gainsays. Dare no man tell him leave, with whatever force that he may, and yet may no man believe one word that he says, no letter. He can make purveyance with boast and braggance, and all is through maintenance of men that are greater. There shall come a swain as proud as a Poe, he may borrow my wain, my plough also. Then I'm full fain to grant ere he go, thus live we in pain, anger and woe, by night and by day he must have if he wants it, even if I should forego it, I were better be hanged than once say him nay. It does me good as I walk thus by my own, of this world for to talk in manner of moan. To my sheep I will stalk and hearken anon, there abide on a balk or sit on a stone full soon, for I think party true men if they be, we get more company ere it be noon. So basically, again, the beginning portion, Call is just complaining about the weather, the natural world. Lord, how this weather is cold. I'm numb with cold. My legs, they fold. My fingers are chapped in storms and tempests, now in the east, now in the west. So, I mean, this is, again, the world around him, the world of northern England, right? But then we move to this second portion where he's talking about the social inequality faced by rural people. For are we so hammed, so foretaxed and rammed? Basically, this is they're overtaxed. Their goods are taken in excess, and these gentlery men, thus they rob us our rest. Again, they're sort of subject to the whims of the nobility. And then he's got this bit, for he may get a paint sleeve or brooch nowadays. Woe is him that him grieves or once gainsays. So these were the symbols of the people who worked for the aristocracy, tax collectors and officials and things like this, who went out among the rural poor, the rural working class, and basically just commandeered their stuff. And Call is saying here, there's nothing we, the poor, can do to stop them. They come and they take our wagons, take our plows, they tax us, they do whatever. And if we say anything about it, if we resist in any way, then we're going to suffer significant penalties. But he gets to this end portion. It does me good as I walk thus by mine own, of this world for to talk in manner of moan. To my sheep I will stalk and hearken anon, there abide on a balk or sit on a stone. So there is this sort of, this kind of degree of freedom for them as shepherds that the rural farmers don't have. The people who depend on farm equipment and things like this and are stuck in one place. Whereas the shepherds, who are much more mobile and can go and sort of just sit and chat while their sheep graze and stuff like this, they have much greater freedom in a way. So there is that sort of interesting twist that the shepherds are the figures of liberty within this medieval system of inequality. Because, of course, one of the metaphors, one of the analogies for Christ is the shepherd protecting his flock through the process of salvation. Then his friend Gib comes in, and Gib gives us another dimension of complaint. Specifically, he's complaining about his wife. He's a henpecked husband. And what this does is it introduces the theme of family life and nativity, because he also complains to a certain extent about his children. And so this becomes an important idea within the play. So the upshot of this is the first 270 some lines is primarily just them complaining about how hard life is. That's really all we get in the first part. The other thing that I want to mention is that, before I get to the real sort of weird part for modern audiences, is that there's also a lot of anachronistic oaths that would be very common among medieval Christians. Like, Gibb says at line 132, "For God that you bought," which is a reference to Christ's suffering on the cross, redeeming humanity from its sinful state. And then later at 170 and 171, Daw, who's the shepherd boy who hangs out with them, says, "Christ's cross me speed and St. Nicholas." That's not around yet. This is a play that takes place right before the birth of Jesus. The crucifixion is 30-some years in the future. St. Nicholas further down than that. So there are these anachronistic references that, again, mark these speakers as rural Northern English shepherds. There is no attempt to sort of say, here is how actual 1st century BCE Palestinian shepherds would have talked, acted, thought, etc., the conditions they would have had. This is an interesting, weird bit, because this so often happens in sort of medieval biblical literature, drama, arts, things like this, is that time gets compressed. And part of this is about they don't really have a sense of historiography in the way that we think of it today, where, like, the question, what were the actual material conditions experienced by shepherds in 1st century BCE Palestine, just wouldn't really make sense to them. Or perhaps more accurately, they simply wouldn't have the tools to even start figuring that out. But there's also this sense that in a cosmological view, a grand view of biblical cosmology, in which God is eternal, all time is interconnected. From God's perspective, time is not really meaningful. And so to imagine the shepherds of the Nativity story as being the same as the shepherds of contemporary 16th century England makes perfect sense from that perspective. Because from God's perspective, all time is one. But then there's also just the element of this is a pedagogical tool. This is essentially an ideological state apparatus in Louis Althusser's terms. It is meant to teach a largely illiterate population biblical lessons. And so, how do you do that? How do you teach someone a lesson that you want them to learn? You make it relevant to them. And so this is what this does. This is also part of the reason why we get this next bizarre sequence that actually takes up the vast majority of the poem, or of the play. We get this character, Mac, who enters around line 273, and he basically convinces the shepherds to go to sleep, and then he steals one of their sheep. And he and his wife, Gil, take the sheep and they wrap it up in a blanket and they put it in the cradle. And their big plan to prevent the shepherds from finding it is that they're going to pretend that this sheep is their baby. And this goes up really through about line 923 or so. So this is about 700 lines out of a poem that is altogether 1094 lines, somewhere in there. So there's about 500 lines that are not devoted to this sheep stealing incident and 700 that are. And it has nothing to do with the biblical story, overtly. There are themes with it about, again, sort of Mac, who comes with false tidings in sort of inversion of the angel who later comes with the good tidings of Christ's birth, with the false child that is in fact a stolen sheep. in an inversion of the true child, the true redeemer, that's Christ at the end of the play. So there are these parallels. But it's such a sort of comic, carnivalesque type interlude that I think for modern readers and modern audiences, it's very difficult to make sense of why this would be in a biblical play. And I think the reason is because the medieval mind didn't view religion in the way that we do today, right? Today, religious people tend to be very skeptical about humor associated with religion. Not always necessarily, but often. And so religious plays today that are like properly pro-religious, as opposed to satires of religion that critique religion, properly religious plays, movies, things like this tend to be fairly serious. They tend to take their subject matter seriously because it is part of the sacred. For the medieval mind, that distinction didn't really matter. The sacred did not have to be dealt with seriously. It could be dealt with humor. It could be dealt with this almost like Three Stooges style of comedy. And we see this not just in the Wakefield Cycle, the Second Shepherd's Play in particular, but we see this in the York Cycle as well. We see this in a number of other elements of medieval culture, where you had this blending of very important social, theological, cultural elements alongside this very lowbrow humor. So that's what we really get with the play. That's why these things are happening. But the other reason that these things are happening is, again, this is a play for a medieval audience of peasants and townsfolk. You have very few forms of entertainment in the medieval period, and so if you want people to watch your play, it behooves you to put some humor in it. And it is worth noting that, again, these are cycle plays. This is a whole series of plays. I think the Towneley Cycle, which is the Wakefield Cycle is also called the Towneley Cycle because of the family who owned the manuscript for a long, long time. I think in the Towneley manuscript, there's something like 32 plays. Not all of them are humorous. I'm more familiar with the York Cycle. There are some plays in the York Cycle that are absolutely hilarious. And there are some that are very, very serious and just directly sort of give you the subject matter and teach you whatever moral lesson. But again, if you want people to watch a cycle of plays, especially, you want some comic relief in there. And so this sheep stealing incident serves that purpose. It diffuses some of the tension with this otherwise sort of lengthy narrative of biblical history. But then we go immediately, basically from Call, Gibb, and Daw finding their sheep and threatening to punish Mac and Gil, to this angel entering, singing Gloria in Excelsis, and then saying, "Rise, herdsman, hend, for now is he born, that shall take from the fiend that Adam had lorn, that devil to shend, this night is he born, God is made your friend now at this morn. He behests, at Bedlam go see, there lies that free, in a crib full poorly betwixt two beasties." And then the angel goes. And this is the call to the shepherds to go and adore the baby Christ. Incidentally, Bedlam, this is an interesting one because in London, in English, medieval English, Bethlehem got condensed to Bedlam. So we have today the term Bedlam, like meaning chaos, meaning insanity, and that comes from Bethlehem Hospital, which was a madhouse in London, which was the name Bethlehem was condensed to Bedlam, and it makes it into this play, not meaning Bethlehem Hospital in London, but meaning we get that term. So Bedlam means Bethlehem. And we see, again, how this sort of English dialect of the medieval period is showing up in the play and shaping the ways in which the characters speak. So the shepherds, Call, Gib, and Daw, are basically like, whoa, this is nuts. We're like so honored. All of these prophets and kings and whatnot really just wanted to see this moment, and they never got to, and we get to. This is such a huge honor. So they go to Bethlehem. They go to the stable. They give Jesus some cherries, which is an interesting gift because cherries would be out of season in the winter, especially in England. And they give him a tennis ball, which is a weird gift. But the reason they give him a tennis ball is because tennis in the late medieval period was a sport of the wealthy. And so Jesus comes to be the King of Kings. And so in this sense, he is sort of getting associated through the gifts that he's given with monarchy, aristocracy, social authority. But what I find so bizarre and fascinating about the final portion of the scene, or the final portion of the play, from about 1029 up through 1093 or so, it's just Call, Gib, and Daw who speak. They're in the manger at Bethlehem. The baby Jesus is there. Presumably Mary and Joseph are there. Maybe the wise men. Other people are probably there. And actually, in the picture that the Norton Anthology includes, this is from, where's it from? Folger Shakespeare Library's production. I mean, you can see Mary and Joseph. I presume that's Mary and Joseph. And so Mary and Joseph are there, but they say nothing. It's just Call, Gib, and Daw talking to the baby Jesus and then going. And then they leave. And that's all there is to it. There's no interaction with the parents at all. It's very, very odd. Again, if you're thinking about it from the perspective of what dramatically makes sense. But it's such a bizarre, fascinating play that really does reflect these medieval ways of looking at the world.